in AD 73, the world changed forever. When Viking raiders stormed the holy island of Lindisfarne, they didn't just steal gold, they shattered the psyche of Europe. For the next 3 centuries, these pagan pirates would act as the grim reapers of the continent, conquering lands from Russia to the Mediterranean. But what made them so unstoppable? It wasn't just their longships or their axes, it was their minds. Professor Tom Shippey argues that the Vikings possessed a unique psychological weapon, a bad sense of humor. They viewed death not with fear, but with a cold, mocking fascination. While the rest of Europe prayed for salvation, the Vikings were busy composing poetry about their own demise. Their sagas, written centuries later in Iceland, are filled with heroes who treat their final moments like a punchline. Historians used to dismiss these stories as fiction, but recent archaeological discoveries suggest that the Viking mindset was very real. It was a philosophy of grim laughter, where the ultimate victory wasn't surviving, but dying in a way that made for a good story. To understand this lethal psychology, we have to look at how they died. We will examine 5 legendary Viking deaths, ranging from snake pits to mass beheadings. These aren't just stories, they are windows into the soul of a culture that believed you could kill a man, but you could never, ever frighten him. The most famous death in Viking lore belongs to Ragnar Lodbrok. According to the sagas, this legendary hero was captured by the Northumbrian King Ea and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. As the vipers bit into his flesh, Ragnar didn't scream for mercy. He laughed. He looked up at the king and delivered a line that would doom a kingdom. The piggies would grunt if they knew how the old boar died. It sounds like barnyard humor, but it was a death sentence disguised as a joke. The old boar was Ragnar, and the piggies were his sons Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and the rest. Ragnar wasn't asking for rescue, he was promising an apocalypse. He knew he was dead, so he used his last breath to ensure his enemies would suffer a fate far worse. And he was right. In 865, the great heathen army led by his sons landed in England, tore King Aea apart, and conquered half the country. While the snake pit might be a myth, the invasion was real. The saga writers likely invented the death to explain the ferocity of the vengeance. It perfectly illustrates the Viking belief that a good death is a weapon. Ragnar's joke wasn't for him. It was a psychological grenade thrown into the future, ensuring his name would outlive his body. If Ragnar taught Vikings how to threaten, Dot taught them how to trick. In the saga of King Hrolf Kraki, the Danish King Arthur, a great hall is ambushed by a traitorous cousin, Jorvard. Hrolf and his champions die fighting, leaving only Verger, a weak man who had been the court's laughingstock. Jorvard, drunk on victory, demands Voger swear allegiance to him. He hands Voger his own sword to seal the vow. It was a fatal mistake. Voger didn't swear, he stabbed. He ran the usurper through with his own blade, fulfilling his vow to avenge his master. Voger was killed seconds later, but he died, having turned the tables in the most humiliating way possible. The joke was on the conqueror. For centuries, this was seen as a fable. Then, archaeologists started digging in Læsø, Denmark. They found the remains of massive great halls, exactly where the saga said Hrolf ruled. The site was a real power center of the Iron Age. This discovery suggests that beneath the layers of myth lies a hard kernel of truth, the Viking obsession with wit, the ability to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat through a clever, violent trick wasn't just storytelling. It was history. But the darkest humor of all comes from the Vikings, a legendary brotherhood of mercenaries who lived by a strict code, never show fear. After a crushing defeat in Norway, the surviving mercenaries were lined up for execution. It was a conveyor belt of death. One by one, they were beheaded. But instead of begging, they trolled their executioners. One refused to kneel, insisting on staring the axe down. Another pulled the ultimate prank. He asked a captor to hold his long, beautiful hair away from his neck so it wouldn't get bloody. As the axe swung down, the Viking jerked his head back. The axe missed his neck and chopped off the hands of the man holding his hair. The Viking looked up and laughed. The Viking leader, Jarl Erik, found this so hilarious that he spared the man's life. The mercenary then coolly negotiated for the lives of his friends. It sounds like a Hollywood script, but reality is stranger. Near the site of this legendary execution, road workers discovered a mass grave containing about 50 decapitated skeletons. They were all young men, all Scandinavian, and many had been beheaded from the front, just as the saga described. The bones prove that the Vikings' defiance wasn't a myth, it was a physical reality. Sometimes, the Viking mindset required dying for art. King Olaf of Norway, later Saint Olaf, faced a massive peasant army in 1030. On the morning of his death, he didn't ask for a prayer, he asked for a poem. His court poet, Thormod, sang the Bjarkamal, a suicide song about waking up to fight and die. The army loved it. They marched into battle, chanting about their own destruction. Olaf was butchered, but Thormod survived the initial clash, lamenting that he hadn't died with his king. He was suddenly struck by an arrow that seemed to come from nowhere. He took it as a gift from the dead Olaf, an invitation to Valhalla. Thormod pulled the arrow out and composed a poem about the wound, dying on his feet before he could finish the last line. The line was finished by a young bystander named Harald Hardrada. Years later, Harald would become the most feared king in Europe. But he never forgot that lesson. Poetry is more important than life. In 1066, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold was caught unarmored by the English army. Knowing he was doomed, he composed a poem on the spot. But Harold was a snob. He decided his first death poem was too simple and composed. A second, more complex one while his army was being slaughtered. He fought with two hands on his sword, unarmored, until an arrow caught him in the throat. He died as he lived, criticizing his own art while killing Englishmen. The Battle of Stamford Bridge ended the Viking Age, but it cemented their legacy. Harold's death paved the way for William the Conqueror, a descendant of Vikings. To take England weeks later, the Vikings may have lost the battle, but their DNA conquered the kingdom. This brings us to the core of the Viking mindset. It wasn't about winning every fight. It was about how you faced the end. Whether it was Ragnar's threats, Vogra's trickery, or Hardrada's poetry, the message was the same. Death is certain. So let's make it entertaining. This fatalistic humor made them terrifying. You can kill a man who loves life. But How do you defeat a man who treats his own death like a joke? The answer, as history shows, is that you don't. You just wait until the last one is dead. But can these poems really be attributed to Harold Hardrada? I don't see there's any way that the poems could be genuine. After all, who was there to note it down or remember it? Practically none of the Norwegians survived. I expect Snorri Sturluson made them up himself to help his story out. But they're good poems. They express a kind of not regretful attitude. But it's sort of rueful, yeah. Well, we're not going to win this one. They caught us this time. Oh well, that's the way it goes. We will just have to fight it out. And that strikes me as, again, a characteristic Viking attitude. The Battle of Stamford Bridge had unintended consequences, paving the way for another invader to become King of England. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was, of course, a catastrophe. It was a catastrophe for the Norwegians. But it was a catastrophe for the English as well, because they took very heavy casualties. And 3 weeks after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, they fought the Battle of Hastings against William the Conqueror. And you can't help thinking if they'd been at full strength, they'd have won. On 14th October 1066, the English army suffered a crushing defeat at Hastings, and Harold Godwinson was killed. England's new king, William the Conqueror, was himself descended from a Viking adventurer. The Viking Age was at an end. For nearly 3 centuries, Europe had been terrorized by Scandinavian warriors whose attitude to death gave them a dangerous edge. What finally strikes me about the Viking mindset is not so much the defiance in the face of death. That's what you expect heroes to do. It's actually the matter-of-fact attitude. And also the liking for some kind of a joke. You can actually use vulgar words like Ragnar in the snake pit. You can play dirty tricks like Vugger with his Pledge of Allegiance. Or you can play practical jokes like the Jomsviking getting the guy's hands cut off. Or you can nitpick about poetry like Thormod and Harald Hardrada. All these say, death is coming. It's certain, but actually, I'm going to see what I can do to make this memorable. What it makes me think is that when it comes to Vikings, you can kill them. And speaking as an Englishman, we did over there, but frighten them. That's not going to work. They're always going to come back at you. You're not safe until the very last one of them is dead.